All right, let's finish up the rest of October part 2. You still have 4 questions. Why does his sister do it? What does Holling owe everyone? How many weeks of allowance will Holling need? What will they read together first? That night at supper, my father looked at me with an unbecoming passion. Holling, he said, everything all right with Mrs. Baker? Just swell, I said. You didn't help her to make cream puffs yesterday, did you? No, sir. You didn't sneak down to the school kitchen and do anything to Mrs. Biggio's powdered sugar, did you? No, sir, no sneaking. So everything is all right? It's just swell. You don't know anything about... Okay, this is where God broke in to pay me back for all that had happened because I was a Presbyterian. Because if my father had finished his question, I might have had to give him something pretty far from the truth. But he never finished asking because my sister came in and sat down across from me, and on her cheek she had painted a bright yellow flower. My father stared at it and then turned to my mother. Tell your daughter that she has a bright yellow flower painted on her cheek. I know I have a flower painted on my cheek, said my sister. Why? Said my father. Isn't it obvious? Not unless you want us to believe that you're a flower child. My sister didn't say anything. There was a little pause while the whole world sucked in its breath. No, said my father, you're not a flower child. A flower child is beautiful and doesn't do anything to harm anyone, said my sister. My father closed his eyes. We believe in peace and understanding and freedom. We believe in sharing and helping each other. We are going to change the world. A flower child, said my father, opening his eyes, is a hippie who lives in Greenwich Village in dirty jeans and beads and who can't change their socks. 50,000 flower children protested the war at the Pentagon today, and they all say that you're wrong. Well, fortunately, right and wrong doesn't depend on math. Well, they don't depend on President Johnson either. Well, thank you, Miss Political Analyst, said my father. Now analyze this. The person to whom you are now speaking is a candidate for the Chamber of Commerce Businessman of 1967. This is an honor that he has wanted for a long time. It is also an honor that will lead to larger, more profitable ventures than he has yet seen. It is not an honor that is awarded to a man who has a daughter who calls herself a flower child. So go wash your face. There was another one of those long pauses because the world still hadn't let out its breath. It was a really long pause. The world must have been about ready to have a spell. Then my sister shoved back her chair and went upstairs. She came down with only a yellow smudge. Pass the lima beans, said my father. That night my sister opened my door. Thanks for all your help, Holling. A flower child? You want support for being a flower child? I want support for believing in something bigger than just me. Then don't paint a bright yellow flower on your face. You look stupid. Imagine that, she said, and you don't have to paint anything on your face to look stupid. You're not going to get my support that way, I pointed out. 50,000 people at the Pentagon, Holling. 50,000. Something big is happening, and it's starting right now. Maybe it's time to think about growing up. So I can become a flower child? So you can become who you're supposed to be. Holling Hood. Well, in case you haven't noticed, I am Holling Hood. Isn't it comforting to think so? But when I look at you, all I see is the son who is going to inherit the firm. It's the same thing, I said. Only if you let it be the same thing. Why do you let him bully you? Why don't you stand up to him? Well, it works so well when you stand up to him. My sister put her hand to her cheek. So why do it? I said. To let him know that I don't like being told who I am. And that's number 4. I don't like being told who I'm going to be. You don't have a flower on your cheek now. It doesn't look like it made a whole lot of difference. Well, it made a difference to me, she said, and went to her bedroom to play the monkeys loudly. The next morning, Mrs. Baker was waiting for me in the coat room. Mr. Hood, we have been thinking about our Wednesday afternoon routines, and we need to make some changes. Remember the ham and cheese and broccoli omelet? We do, I said. We do. We'll talk about it on Wednesday, but no more chores. Or perhaps just one. One more? For another cream puff, perhaps. I felt my unbecoming passion rising. Okay, I said, one more chore, but I don't need the cream puff. Imagine that, said Mrs. Baker and walked away. This was a new strategy, I was sure, but I didn't have time to figure it out. You got one of the cream puffs? Said merrily. Well, not exactly, I said. Well, Mrs. Baker just said for another cream puff. Another. And you said okay, so how is that not exactly? Danny Hupfer came over. You got one of the cream puffs? Well, I didn't eat it. Sure you didn't eat it. You put it up on a shelf so you could just look at it. No, I really didn't eat it. You owe us all cream puffs, said merrily. What do you mean I owe you all cream puffs? I'll speak slowly and clearly. You owe us all cream puffs. And that is number 5. Where am I supposed to get cream puffs for the whole class? That's your problem, said Danny Hupfer. Find the cream puffs or die. Maiti looked at me and narrowed her eyes. Let me tell you, it's pretty hard to be in grade 7 with new death threats hanging over you just about every day. On the way home, I stopped at Goldman's Best Bakery. They had cream puffs too, without chalk dust. But you wouldn't believe how much money they wanted for them. It would take 3 weeks' worth of allowance to be able to pay for 22 cream puffs. 3 weeks. And that is number 6. On Monday, I told Danny and Marilee and Maiti that I needed 3 weeks. They agreed, sort of, but the death threats were repeated every day, along with new and colorful descriptions of what would happen if the cream puffs didn't appear. Let me tell you, Danny Hupfer has a bloody imagination, but he's nothing compared to Marilee. I was almost glad when Wednesday came and Mrs. Baker and I were alone again. Can you believe it? I felt safer with Mrs. Baker, even if I still hadn't figured out the new strategy. Mr. Hoodhood, said Mrs. Baker, we have been wasting our opportunities. We have? We have. On Wednesday afternoons from now on, we will be reading Shakespeare together. Shakespeare? You don't need to repeat everything I say. I presume that you know the English language well enough, or I wouldn't ask you to read Shakespeare. I nodded. First, we'll read The Merchant of Venice aloud together, so that I can be sure that you are following the dialogue. Afterward, you'll be reading on your own. But for now, we will start with The Merchant of Venice. And that is number 7.